Okay, well, let's see, it's 5 after 4, so I'll go ahead and do my little introduction for the 9 of us or the 8 of us. And anybody else I'll let them in. Most of you know me, I'm Kim Kyle with the Boca Grande Historical Society. I'm the administrative director for the past 22 years. Thank you for joining us today. Before I introduce our moderator and author, I just want to acknowledge and thank our sponsor, Ferguson Skipper, Attorneys at Law, for sponsoring this Let's Talk About Florida book series of talks for this season. And some of you may also know, and I always want to do a little plug for this, that we're going to be moving. The Boca Grande Historical Society and History Center is moving into the Louise DuPont Crown and Shield Community House later this spring or early summer, and we will officially reopen sometime in the fall with the date to be determined. We're very anxious to get back into a real space where people can actually come and see us. So just watch for information over the summer announcing updates and how you can donate to our legacy fund to help fund this unique and a new and never seen type of exhibit on the island. We're really excited for everybody. Today's author and moderator is Lyn Millner. She's the author of The Allure of Immortality, An American Cult, A Florida Swamp, and a Renegade Prophet, named by the Wall Street Journal as one of the top 5 books on cults. Her audio stories have been broadcast on National Public Radio's Morning Edition and Weekend Edition and on American Public Media's Marketplace. Her work has also appeared in the New York Times, USA Today, and Oxford American. She is a professor of journalism at Florida Gulf Coast University. So Lyn, the show is yours.
Thank you. Thank you guys for coming. It's such a pleasure to speak to people who care about history. That's the first thing I want to say. And I recognize all the hours that go into organizing and being part of a historical society. And it's one of my favorite things to do, right up there with libraries, is talking to people who really love history and know that we can learn from it and know that it repeats itself. So this book, this story that I'm going to be talking about has so many pieces that are so illogical that sometimes if I start talking and it's not clear, there's a reason for that. There's just a lot to explain about the Koreshans. So first, I want to just start by asking you guys if you have heard of the Koreshans, just show of hands. No? Okay. Okay, so wow, 3, wow. Okay, Ron, you didn't raise your hand, and I happen to know that you have heard of the Koreshans.
Oh, I read the book. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, well, that counts. Okay.
Okay. That was the first introduction.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting though. Okay. Well, hopefully you got a comprehensive view of the Koreshans from the book, and who has been down to the state park? Okay, Vicky has visited the site. Okay, so only 3 of us then? You got to go. If we were here
by the water, I didn't see it.
Right. Well, you kind of did. You saw it the way that everybody who saw it the first time saw it. Okay, so that gives me a way to kind of gauge what I want to say. I want to show you some pictures of the place as it looks today, and then we're also going to get into some historical photos as well. So I wrote this book. I was asked to talk, Karen asked me to talk in particular about how I got involved and wanted to write this book. I heard about the Koreshans from a friend who was a poet, and we were riding along the interstate, and this was before I lived in Southwest Florida. We were riding along the interstate and we saw one of those brown signs, those government state signs that tell you that there's some park or facility or whatever. And we passed it and it said Koreshan or something. And my poet friend said, just very bluntly, oh, that's the people who believe they lived in the center of the earth. And I thought, well, he's a poet, right? He's just, he doesn't know what whatever. He says weird things all the time. So a few years go by and I move. And wouldn't you know it, I moved to that interstate exit where that brown sign is. And at the time, I made my living as a freelance writer. So the way that I made a living was I pitched stories to magazines and newspapers. So I was always looking for my next story. And I thought, this Koreshan thing, right? It stuck in my brain. I think I'm going to go over there and pitch a story. And I pitched it to the Oxford American. And they said, yeah, write it. And it was a 2,000 word magazine story. And I went there and very quickly, I saw that 2,000 words was not going to do these people justice. I had access to photos, I had access to their journals, letters, newspaper stories, so much. And the articles I had read about them were something to the effect of, here are the Koreshans, weren't they kooky? And I felt like I didn't want to write another story like that. And very quickly, I realized this is not a magazine story, this is a book. And I think the Oxford American also realized that because they thought in 2,000 words, you are not going to be able to do these people justice. So off I went and researched, and 5 years later, I had the book. So a ton of research went into this, and I am my idols are people like Candace Millard, Eric Larson, people who write nonfiction, but they write it in a novelistic way, using character and scene and plot and story arc. And the Koreshans were just made for that. So I just put my head down and got into the research and just got sucked in. As I said, my nose print was one of the many nose prints on the planetary court because I would just go to the site and look in and try to see what I could see from them. And I fell in love with some of these characters. So that's how I came to write the book. And I wrote it it's nonfiction. Every bit of dialogue comes from either a letter or a newspaper article or something that was recorded on paper. So it is all true, um, painstakingly so, but I've written it like a narrative, like a work of fiction. So in the style of Devil in the White City, etc. So I'm going to share my screen. And today I'm going to show you some slides, and I'm also going to play a little clip of audio and a clip of video from, I believe, the 40s. The only video I know of that shows one of the original Koreshans. And so I'll start just by giving you just a quick overview. So this is about a forgotten Florida utopia that actually had
much.
Huh?
We didn't miss much.
Need to mute whoever that
Oh.
was. Please.
So it's a story of utopian dreams, religious fervor, and there is a very unexpected connection to a modern cult. I don't know if you guys followed the Waco story in the 90s, but it turns out that there is a very important, just national significance to this little obscure utopia in Southwest Florida. We'll get to that a little bit later. So today we're going to talk about the Koreshans, and we're going to talk about the discovery of the Waco connection. And then, of course, I want to take your questions. So that's an important part of this. Here they are. This is a photo of the Koreshans on the grounds of what is now the state park. This was likely at a festival. They often had festivals. They had a lunar festival and a solar festival each year to celebrate their leaders. And it is only a couple of hours from Boca Grande, and that is because having to navigate the estuary and the landmass, it would have been much faster to take a boat. And in fact, that's, the Koreshans went back and forth by boat because there was only a very, narrow dirt trail going up to Fort Myers from the Koreshan State Park when they were here. So okay, I've already asked whether people have been to the park. It is at the corner of Corkscrew and 41. It's open to the public. It is a treasure. You can go there and see buildings that have been restored. And these were buildings that were built, many of them in the late 1890s. And then the art hall, the new building, was built in 1905. So I want to know what you guys know about the Koreshans already. What were some of their beliefs?
How long is this program, Lynn?
Okay, Ron's not allowed to answer this question.
You told us already, and to me, the oddest thing or the hardest thing I have to get my head around is their sense that we lived not on the outside of the earth, but on the inside.
Yeah, and that is, it's hard to get your head around. And I actually read the cliff notes of Cyrus Teed's Cellular Cosmogony, which explained that because I couldn't make sense of it. So I am going to give you an image that'll help you visualize that. Anyone heard that they were celibate?
Yeah, well,
That was one of their, anyone heard about the equity between men and women? Anyone heard that they shared all of their possessions communally? Okay, so I'll tell you about them. This is a drone footage of the settlement. Now we're looking down at the planetary court where the leading women of the community lived. And in that turret, they had a man living there who was sort of watched over them. I love that little detail. He lived in the cupola of the planetary court. We'll hear about him. His name was Henry Silverfriend, and he was a silver friend indeed. He helped finance some of Teed's activities. This would be the view that Kim would have seen when she was kayaking or canoeing down the river. This is just right off of the deck there. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous place to kayak, the Estero River. They were quite skilled woodworkers. This is one of the bridges that you can find on the property. This is the planetary court where the leading women lived. And this was their fearless leader. This guy's name is Cyrus Teed. Most people have never heard of him, but he's got a very unusual story. He was born in Trout Creek, New York in 1839. When he was 11, he worked on the Erie Canal. He had a position known as a hoggy. He was one of the boys that would lead the mules down the sides of the canal, and those mules were dragging the pallet boats down the canal. So he witnessed lots of things on the Erie Canal. It was a marketplace, a traveling marketplace of ideas in the 1870s and 80s. People were talking about all sorts of things. He went on, he soaked it up. He was a sponge. He went on to become a staunch anti-capitalist. He spent time trying to abolish wage labor entirely. But then ironically, he ended up running his parents' mop factory, and it flopped under his direction. He invented an electrotherapeutic apparatus, which provided some health benefits. And he was a self-appointed prophet who really tried to usurp the American way of life. He was incredibly charismatic. From a very young age, he was an amazing speaker. And in those days, being a really good speaker was akin to today's athlete. So just like today, if you were really talented at athletics, your life really revolves around it. People want you to go to the NBA draft and all of that. And in those days, listening to speakers were like celebrities. So in those days, listening to speakers was how you educated yourself, how you found entertainment. So for him to be such an eloquent speaker at such a young age, his parents started pressuring him, right, to really get into it. And they thought he would become a preacher, as his grandfather was. Well, instead, he became a doctor of eclectic medicine, and that really was a legit form of medicine at the time. It's, if you can think of it like homeopathy today. So he becomes a doctor of eclectic medicine, and he was also a faith healer. He was an alchemist, and in 1869, he was working in his alchemy lab in Utica, New York. He was trying to turn lead into gold, and he successfully did it, or so he believed. Right after that, an angel appeared to him. She was clothed in purple and gold and just bathed in white light, and she was the female embodiment of God. And so she appears to him and she says, "You are sent to earth to redeem humanity." That's a big, big task. And so he believed that living within him, he had a spirit. He changed his name to Koresh, and he wrote about this vision. He believed, so the word Koresh is the Hebrew transliteration of the first name Cyrus, and his first name was Cyrus. He believed that he was Cyrus from the Bible, the Persian king who freed the Jews from Babylon. So Teed believed he was the modern day Cyrus. In the 70s, he founded a commune called the Koreshan Unity, and he announced that the new kingdom would be formed through women's emancipation and the destruction of capitalism. So this was revolutionary at the time. Okay, this is these are some of the photos. This is Teed on the right, walking along the Estero River. On the left, top left, we've got pictures of the Koreshans as well. And then at the bottom, they did have a sense of humor about their belief that they lived inside of the earth. And this is just one of the lecture tickets, and it says, "We live inside, drop in and see us." So they lived communally. If you joined, you donated your money and possessions to the community. And we'll learn about the hollow earth belief in a moment. They also believed they'd achieve immortality through celibacy and that they would live forever in utopia. For a while, they were in Chicago. So Teed began getting followers when he came to Chicago. He was doing a faith healing session. At the time, Mary Baker Eddy was quite popular. She was making money hand over fist doing faith healing. And so Cyrus Teed was also doing faith healing, and he started to attract a following based on his faith healing. Here they are at their mansion in Chicago. And I want you to look at this picture, and then you'll look at the next picture that I'm going to show you. And I want to know what differences you see. So this was in the late 1800s. They were living in a Chicago mansion. Teed was having trouble with creditors, and he was also having trouble with husbands because, as you can see in the picture, there are quite a few women who joined. And when they joined, many of them left their husbands in order to join. Remember, he was preaching female emancipation, and he was doing that. So a lot of husbands were not happy with this, and several husbands actually sued Cyrus Teed for alienation of affection. So he was sued by his creditors. He was sued by husbands who claimed that he had taken their wives, and he was also catnip for journalists. And this was in the age of yellow journalism, one of my favorite parts of history that we're actually reliving today. So there was a lot in the media about Teed. So I want you to look at this picture of them living high in Chicago, and then look at this picture of them on the Estero River. This is one of the contrasts that made me want to write about them. These are people looking at their mansion picture. They loved music. They were well read. They had an orchestra. They went on to develop a marching band. They read Shakespeare. They knew Latin. They wrote hymns. These were educated people. They gave up everything to follow this man to a mosquito-infested jungle and build a utopia. That blew me away. And this is why I thought they deserve better than a 2,000-word article saying, aren't they kooky? Because these were real people. So today, if you go, you can see the original settlement. A man named Dom Kohler settled the land, and Teed got the land from Dom Kohler. So Teed left Chicago, left the angry husbands and the angry creditors, and found this place. And he met this old, broken down homesteader at the end of his rope. The homesteader met Teed and believed that he was the Messiah, and he gave Teed 300 acres of land for a song. He gave Teed 300 acres for $200. Can you imagine? So that was about $6,000 then. What do you think this property is worth today? A lot more. He went on to acquire more land in Southwest Florida. At one point, the Koreshans owned between 6,000 and 7,500 acres of land in Southwest Florida. So the hollow earth belief, somebody said, had trouble wrapping your head around it. This is the best way I know to imagine it. If you took one of those old-fashioned school globes, peeled off the paperboard map, split it open, pasted that paperboard map on the inside of the globe, you would have an approximation of what Teed believed about the earth. So we stand on the edges of the earth looking in at everything. So the earth contained, if you were standing on the crust of the earth inside the globe, you would be looking at the heavens, the planets, the stars, the whole universe. So it was really kind of a sweet concept. Teed believed that in this kind of, he blended religion and science. You remember the faith healing. And he believed that God wouldn't create anything that humans couldn't know. So by standing on the crust of the earth and looking in at all of God's creation, was kind of a promise. It was a science that went along with this religion that all would be revealed. So we have a model of this working globe. It is in the art hall at the Koreshan State Historic Site, and it shows how it works. There are the heavens, the stars, the planets, everything contained there, and it closes right up. It is encased in gold, and outside of the earth, there is complete nothingness. There's just nothing. So the Koreshans knew that no one was going to take them seriously unless they could prove that we lived inside of the earth. And so they actually went to Naples Beach. It was then, they went to Naples Beach, and they had this apparatus that was known as a rectilineator. Now, when I say rectilineator, people are often confused and they say, what were they doing with their rectums? You know, it doesn't make any sense. So the rectilineator was basically a straight line that they could run down the beach in Naples. And the idea was, if we have a curved earth like this and we live inside, if we run the rectilineator down the beach long enough, the earth will start to rise underneath it. We can measure this. And they had calipers and they had all of these instruments, and they proved it to their satisfaction. In the 40s, after many of the Koreshans had died, Fox Movie Tone News got wind of this and decided to come down to Estero and interview one of the remaining Koreshans. And we have a small clip of this interview, and you're going to see Alan Andrews demonstrating this very model, the very scratchy recording. And Alan Andrews is explaining to the Fox Movie Tone News producer how it works and the fact that they had done this survey on Naples Beach. So we're going to hear this. I'm going to switch away so that you can hear it.
The geodetic staff of the Koreshan University of Estero, Florida, conducted a survey on the Gulf Shore at Naples, Florida. This survey covered a period of several months, demonstrating conclusively that the Earth curves upward and that we are living on the inner surface of a hollow globe. Sun, moon, and stars all being within the circumference of 25,000 miles. We have here a working model of the hollow globe, or cellular cosmogony, as we call it. Here on the inner surface of the great shell, you will see the Western Hemisphere. And over here is the Eastern Hemisphere. Here is the sphere of the heavens revolving with sun, moon, and stars. Contrary to the usual belief that China is beneath our feet, it is in reality above us.
So it's clear when I watched this that Alan Andrews thought he had a lot more time to talk about the hollow earth, and you can hear him rushing at the end. And I love imagining the Fox Movie Tone producer just sort of like, can you hurry it up? This needs to be a short sound bite because he could have gone on forever. So Alan Andrews, the man in that film, was the son of Teed's best friend. And he has boyhood memories of Teed coming over and playing croquet in their backyard. And Alan Andrews lived until I think about 1950 and became a noted horticulturalist in Southwest Florida. I think he might have been one of the ones with the idea to help dry out the Everglades by planting Melaleuca. And we know how well that didn't go. Okay, so we've seen the hollow earth and we've seen Alan Andrews. And so the hollow earth theory was very central to Koreshanity and very central. So I want you to look at this photo, this profile of Cyrus Teed, and then I'm going to show you a poster of the hollow earth. And I want you to tell me whether you see something. So focus on his profile. Does anyone see it? I'm looking for smiles. I think I see Karen smiling. I see Ron smiling. So, Karen, what do you see?
Where the outer edge of the ball is split, if you look to the left, you'll see the same nose and
Yep,
eyes and mouth
yep, you do. You do.
of the profile.
Right. He was their god, right? So it made perfect sense to them to have his profile on the edge of the earth. Okay. So getting so here is my hollow earth belief. And one of the reasons I wanted to write this book. I walk around believing this, and what I'm about to say is irrational, but I think some of you might believe this too, because you love to read, you love history, you value the arts, I'm guessing. I thought that people who grew up with strong educations, who were exposed to culture and critical thinking, I thought that that could insulate you from believing crazy things. That's my hollow earth belief. I recognize it's irrational, and yet I've devoted my life to it. I've devoted my life to being an educator and to writing. And so when I got to know the Koreshans and saw that they studied Latin and that they, understood just so many intellectual things, I thought, how? How do they believe this stuff that is just ludicrous? And so that is what led me to write this book. They weren't crazy. That was my hollow earth belief. It's like they were educated, so they can't be crazy, right? Um, and so I was trying to get at the answer to that. Why would intelligent people have such crazy beliefs? Does anybody have any guesses about that? And you can turn on your mics if you want. Why would somebody who was intelligent have a crazy belief?
We look for things to be logical and rational and fact-based. And so if you believe something enough, it becomes real.
Right. You can make it. I mean, humans are meaning-seeking creatures. We crave meaning to the point where belief is really no match for logic. Or sorry, logic is no match for belief. So yeah, we see this today where people make decisions based on their beliefs. This is true because I believe it. Why else might someone who's smart and educated and believe something crazy? Or why would they join this? Why would you give up everything and come down to a mosquito-infested swamp? Any ideas?
Somebody else will make a guess, but the other thing is we're always looking. I mean, it's not unusual for people to look for the ideal place to live, the ideal lifestyle, the ideal community. Um, Most of us compromise a lot along the way and just do the practical thing.
Yeah.
But some people want to create the ideal.
Yeah. Yeah. And we'll give up everything to do it. It's great. It's admirable, right? So I got really interested after this in cults, and the Koreshans did call themselves a cult, but it meant something very different than it means today. Usually there's a very negative connotation with the word cult today. And so I got very interested in this, and I started interviewing former cult members, people who had gotten out of cults, because I was really interested in this question of why would an intelligent person, how could you fall for this? How could people do this, right? And so I interviewed, I've got hours of tape with modern day people who were in high demand societies. And I asked them, why? Why? And so I got lots and lots of quotes, but I have one that really speaks to me that I thought I would play for you. This is a woman named Sharon, and she was very generous with me and talked to me for a long time. She and her husband were in a cult where their daughters were actually sexually abused by the leader, and they just didn't see it until they did. And I asked her, why did you join?
It's hard to explain the sort of weird romance that these groups appeal to. We felt that we were right in the center of God's plan for the world. You have it, you have a feeling that you have all the answers. That everything that was so complicated before now has become quite simple, and the answers are right in front of you, and it's a good feeling, and it was what I wanted.
Yeah, that's a really touching sort of quote from her. Okay, so the David Koresh connection. It frustrated me while I was writing the book that Cyrus Teed had changed his name to Koresh and that Vernon Wayne Howell had changed his name to David Koresh, and I couldn't find any physical link. I studied David Koresh's theology and I knew Cyrus Teed's theology, and they were very similar, very similar. But how would this guy 100 years later have ever heard of Cyrus Teed? The likelihood that he had plagiarized from Cyrus Teed was very low, and I didn't have the proof of it. And I'm a journalist, and I'm not going to go out on a limb and say that something is true if I can't prove it, if I can't verify it. So I put the book to bed, and it comes out, and about, I don't know, 5 years later, I get a call from Jeff Gwynne, who has written 24 books, and he's an amazing dude, and he's been researching Ford and Firestone, and he came across my book and read it. And I was like, Jeff Gwynne read my book? And started researching, and he was researching the Waco siege. And he went through 40,000 pages of the FBI transcripts from the Waco siege, the negotiation transcripts, and saw some interesting things. And about that time, someone in the Waco McClellan Public Library found an obscure book that should not have been there. And it was called Koreshanity, the New Age Religion. And it was about Cyrus Teed. Now, what was a book about Cyrus Teed doing in the Waco McClellan Public Library? That seemed odd. It turns out that the FBI had this book during the negotiations with David Koresh, and they bring up the book in these negotiations. And here is Rick is one of the negotiators with the FBI, and he says, I was just looking the other day about something that this guy Cyrus Teed wrote. Are you familiar with that? And he's talking to Schneider, who is David Koresh's right-hand man. And Schneider says, no, I'm not. And then Schneider says, can you get us that book? I guarantee that we'll give it back to you. So you could, if you even gave it to us for just a day or two, it'll come back in the same condition. And then I love this. The FBI negotiator is suddenly very loyal to our libraries and says, well, let me check on that because it doesn't belong to us. He's worried about losing a library book suddenly in the middle of this siege. So this was sort of a negotiation tactic. And they had, I won't take you through, I've got several shots of the FBI transcripts where they go back and forth. And the FBI realizes their theologies are so similar that David Koresh must have plagiarized from Cyrus Teed. And there was a religious scholar, Phil Arnold, who was able to all but prove this because he had studied the theology. And he actually was one of the people who actually understood what David Koresh was saying on those televised talks. The rest of the media were calling it just Bible babble. And Phil Arnold was like, no, I know what he's saying. I don't agree with it, but I can help you negotiate. Phil Arnold says if they had sent this book in, and if the followers had known that David Koresh plagiarized, many of them would have left. 76 people did not have to die in that fire. Because if the right-hand man, Schneider, had left, people would have followed him. Okay, so I'm skipping through a lot of the FBI transcript. This is just a very odd, the way that Phil Arnold found this book is so odd. This religious scholar was watching television and seeing David Koresh speak on television and understanding what David Koresh was saying and trying to reach the FBI negotiators and say, I can help you negotiate with him. I can help you. I understand what he's saying. Well, there were so many kooks trying to get the attention of the FBI that they ignored Phil Arnold. And he finally just gave up and said, you know what? I'm just going to read a book. So he pulled a book off of his shelf about the House of David baseball team and started reading. And one of the players, it turns out it was mentioned in this book, was a Koreshan. And he thought, what? He'd never heard of the Koreshans of Estero, Florida. And so he started researching Cyrus Teed and finding all of these similarities. The most striking similarities were that both men changed their names to Koresh. No one else in history had ever changed their name to Koresh. They both called themselves the Lamb, the only one who could interpret the seven seals, which is what David was trying to do, was the Lamb. Both believed that the Holy Spirit was a female entity. Both of them called themselves the man of sin. No self-respecting Messiah calls himself a man of sin. And there were just so many other similarities. And Phil Arnold knew that David Koresh had taken these ideas. Now, here's the strange thing. David Koresh might not have known that he was plagiarizing Cyrus Teed or the Koreshan unity. He had a lover. He was the successor of Lois Roden, who was trying to wrest control of the Branch Davidians. She was a reader. She is likely the person who requested that that book be sent to the Waco Public Library. And she probably imparted the theology to David Koresh, and David Koresh built his structure around it. So David Koresh plagiarized from Cyrus Teed, possibly without even knowing that he had done so. And there's some interesting similarities after Teed dies. The followers kept his body in a bathtub. They believed that he was coming back to life. They only put his body in a tomb after the health department ordered them to. And he didn't come back. Most of his body was blown out into the Gulf in the 1921 hurricane. His skull remained and a few bones remained. They put those in the post office in Estero for safekeeping, like you do. And the post office burned down in the 30s, so that skull was destroyed. But just like the Branch Davidians believed that David Koresh was coming back, the Koreshans also believed that their Messiah was coming back, and the Koreshans left a note that they included in his tomb saying, in compliance with the law and only for such reason, the body of Cyrus Teed is placed in this stone vault. We, the disciples of Koresh, shepherd, stone of Israel, know that this sepulchre cannot hold his body, for he will overcome death, and in his immortal body will rise again. So it's written by this woman named Anastasia. We don't know who that is. And the similarities to when David Koresh died are just astounding to me. So this was a shrine to him. The people really believed that they were not going to find his bones because he was alive. I have some people to credit for the images that I've shown you in this presentation, and I want to leave time for your questions. I know you probably have a lot of questions after this. So I'm going to stop here and then kind of let you take over with your questions. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Who has a question? Anybody? Besides Karen? If you do, unmute yourself and ask, please. I don't see anybody. I'll comment. I have lots of questions, but I don't know if I believe the celibacy thing.
Okay.
Okay, being humans, and you put men and women together. I mean, obviously they did die out eventually, but
Yeah,
it's hard
Um,
to wrap my head around that.
it is, and I'm really glad you brought that up. So, they believed that being celibate is the very thing that was going to allow them to live forever. So, by not dispersing their sexual energy, they were able to achieve immortality. So, actually, having sex would have meant that they were mortal and they would have died. So, not on the spot, right? But so that was very important to them. Now, there is evidence that at least two of them did have sex because there was a child that resulted from that. Um, you will see children in the pictures, and those were children who were brought in when their parents joined. So we do have descendants. We have one living descendant that I'm aware of, and so he's a descendant because those they did have children before they came in, and those children, some of those children left. So the celibacy piece is interesting, and I never found any kind of a smoking gun that Teed had sex with the women, although there were a lot of accusations that he did, a lot of accusations.
But if you're immortal, if you're going to live forever, you don't need procreation as a way
Right,
of sustaining organization.
right, right. And people are like, well, how did they think they were going to grow if they weren't going to, procreate? Well, that wasn't the point. They were really actively recruiting people to join. They were going to expositions, that globe model that you saw. They were taking it from, that was in the book. The picture of the book is that globe model at the Buffalo exposition. They were showing it off for visitors, trying to get new followers, and they failed miserably at getting new followers. Some people want to know how they made their money, how they survived in Florida. They had a sawmill, they had a boat works, they had a bakery, they had lots of different industries. They had a general store. They lived right downstream from the orange growers, so they would often fix the orange growers' boats for a fee. They were incredibly advanced. Edison's wife, loved their tea garden, came to their tea garden and often had tea. Firestone was fascinated by their inventions. He was especially fascinated by their laundry dryers and came to see them. So remember that Edison and Ford lived right up the street in the winters from Estero. So they would come down and visit. This was after Teed had passed on. So they had a lot of industry, and the women were given leading positions in the industry. Other people want to know why, why so many women? Why would women join? And you have to remember that in the late 1890s, it was a hard time to be a woman, right? This was the first women's lib movement when we were fighting for suffrage, and women didn't have many rights. And so you could get away from your husband, who might have been not such a nice person and who had control, and live with a like-minded group of women, have shared childcare, and get vocational training. So they had, some of them became stenographers. The opportunities for women in the community were broad. And some of them took leadership positions in industry. So that was partly inspiration for joining. And then, of course, Teed was an attractive, magnetic man. And so some of the women were there because they wanted his, attention and affection. Vicky, did you go to the cemetery in the golf development? I did. I was very interested in the more recent history, the woman who took over, et cetera. Yes, I did. And you can go. So one of their cemeteries is in the middle of Pelican Sound Golf and River Club. They have to let you in because it's a cemetery. So you drive up to the gate and you say, I'm here to see the Koreshan cemetery, and they give you a map and you drive in. I'm not sure the cemetery, it was fenced off, and they were doing some restoration and protective work last time I went. But yes, that recent history is very interesting. A woman came as the Koreshans were aging, a woman came and took over and revived it for a while. And it's because of her work that we have the state park. She donated, she saw the value. She donated the land to the state of Florida to preserve the Koreshan legacy. That was an interesting piece of history. She was a woman escaping Nazi Germany, who learned about the Koreshans and the Hollow Earth theory and came to Estero.
And there's also right across 41 is another property. If I remember, I didn't get there the day that I visited, but there is another property there that was part of the original settlement, correct?
Well, it wasn't part of the original settlement, but it was where Hedwig, this woman who came there, lived and built sort of a headquarters and built sort of what was supposed to be a museum. And it is still there. The house, the building on the property is gone, and it's sort of hidden in some woods and very mysterious, right? But it used to be where the College of Life, which was tasked with preserving Koreshan history, was located, and it was there for a long while. I think the building was torn down just, gosh, 5 to 7 years ago. Don't quote me on that. And they've been trying to sell that land forever. I don't know who owns it now.
Yeah, I did some reading after I had visited the site, and they wanted to develop that property, and the woman, I can't remember her name, but she wouldn't sell. So there's still this little parcel of sort of undeveloped Florida that's in the middle of all of these developments.
Yes. So that is Ellen Peterson. She's not a Koreshan, but she did live there, and she remembers one of the survivors coming and trying to come and get her help. But she formed a trust and protected this little strip of land. Her trust was called Hapahatchee, and that kind of blocked some developers because they wanted to buy a bigger chunk of land, and only that College of Life property was available. They would have had to develop kind of around her chunk of land. So she was very forward thinking. She knew it was going to be attractive to developers, and she wanted that land never to be developed. So she protected it in a trust.
That land now is owned by the village of Estero, and they are turning it into a park. And I understand there's an effort to revive Hapahatchee to maintain that as a spiritual getaway kind of place. Right now, they are building the parking lot on the north side of the river. There will be a bridge that crosses and hiking trails throughout that wooded area.
Oh, that's very cool. I'm happy to hear that, actually. That's great.
Nice. I am happy to hear that too.
Anybody else have a comment or a question or want to share their thoughts about this fascinating, interesting group of people? I just have a hard time wrapping my quote head around their belief of the center, the core, the universe being inside, like there's nothing outside. When we know logically the universe, how vast it is, it's just backwards to me.
Right. Yeah. Teed wasn't the first person to believe in a hollow earth, to theorize about a hollow earth. He was the first person to say that we lived inside of the hollow earth. And to my knowledge, he was the first person to say that everything was inside of the hollow earth.
I would just like to give a plug for Lyn's book. I've been a docent at Koreshan for now in my 13th year. And so I started before Lyn's book was actually published. And previous to that, we had limited information, had to really dig around to multiple different sources here and there. Some theses were written, those kind of things. But when Lyn's book was written, it became the Bible for the docents, really and truly. And we learned things that we didn't know before because Lyn did so much research into personal letters and diaries, and a lot of information that we didn't know before came to light because of the book. And it really is a godsend if you want to understand the Koreshan unity. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. And it's I lucked out because at the time that I started researching it, the College of Life had just released lots of archives that the park had not had access to because the two were kind of not talking. There was a dysfunctional relationship between the two. So the College of Life had just released, and they were at the state archives in Tallahassee, and I was one of the first people to get access to those. So there was a reason that the docents didn't have the information, and I just had the summer to go up and go through all the archives, and I saw letters that Teed had written to his best friend AB or Abby Andrews. I could tell even how hard he had pressed on the page, right? He would believe something so much that he would just underline and almost tear the paper. So I had access to that, and it was amazing. People think that archives are boring, and I'm like, no. You go to archives and you see the most amazing things, and people are pouring their hearts out. And during that one research trip, I sat across from a man who was researching his slavery background, and he had tears pouring down his face. And there's a lot of emotion, a lot of the human condition is contained in those archives and artifacts. It's fascinating. I really felt like I got to know the Koreshans. And then when I wrote the book, I went to the art hall. I was by myself, and I sat there with the book, and I was alone, and I showed him the book, and I said, "You guys, have a book now." So that was fun. I don't know that I really believe they could hear me, but people do say that there is a lot of magic on that property. And I do agree with that.
Very interesting.
Thank you guys.
Anybody else before we sign off, and thank Lyn so much for taking her time out of her day to share her book with us. I can appreciate the research and the archiving and all that, since that's what we do on a different level with local people. But if we don't preserve it, it's lost forever if you don't save things. So you have to thank people.
Big time.
Work.
Lyn,
And
are
thank
you
you, yeah, thank you very much. It was such a treat to be able to actually hear from the author. So
Thank you, Vicky. Thanks for your questions.
thank you very much. That was great.
Thanks.
Lyn, are you aware of any similar activities today? No.
Communal societies.
Yeah, societies that either from a faith standpoint or a social standpoint or whatever are developing, or I mean,
Do you mean
anything that's analogous.
like utopian developments or cults?
I'm thinking more like utopian developments or things that would be more similar to the Koreshans, not.
Yeah. I haven't really studied that. That would be interesting to know. Yeah, intentional communities. Okay, thanks, Jean. Um, there have to be, right? There have to be. But I just haven't studied them. So
That was
it's
interesting.
inspirational, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I never thought of the Waco connection until you brought up his name, and then it was like, oh yeah, Koresh.
Everybody used to ask me about that, and it was so
Yeah.
frustrating.
I get it now that you connected them together, but before I would never thought of it. So thank you. Thank you, Lyn. Everybody, thank you for attending. Anybody else before we say goodbye? I think that's it. Well, thank you all for attending our book talk. I believe we don't have any more scheduled for the foreseeable future until maybe the fall, hopefully we'll be settled in a new space. So look for upcoming announcements on our website and your email. And thank you all for attending, and thank you, Lynn, very much.
Thank
Thank you.
you. I really
Yeah.
enjoyed meeting all of you.
Hope you can come see us sometime.
Okay, I do too.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.